I think we'll make a start at this Cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the 8th of July 2025. I'm Councillor Ian Thorne, Leader of the Council, Chairman of the Cabinet, and I'll be presiding over the meeting. I confirm that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast live, so good morning to everyone listening or viewing via the live stream. Before the meeting begins, I would ask each Cabinet member to confirm their attendance for those watching to the live stream. So could you introduce yourselves, colleagues, and then as other speakers speak, if you could introduce yourselves too, so that everybody at home knows who you are. So I've introduced myself. I'm going to move to my colleague on the left.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Gordon King and I'm the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Adrian Foster and I'm Cabinet Member for Housing, Strategic Planning and Planning Development.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Gavin Grant and I'm the Cabinet Member for Finance.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Paul Sample and I'm the Cabinet Member for Environment, Climate and Waste.
Good morning, Claire Cape, Cabinet Member for Public Health and Coordination with the NHS.
Morning, Helen Belcher, Member for Business Development, Regeneration and Assets.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Martin Smith, Cabinet Member for Highways, Street Scene and Flooding.
Good morning, John Hubbard, Cabinet Member for Children, Education and Skills.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I think we have one apology, and that's Councillor Mel Jacob. I'm going to move to item 2, which is minutes of the 2 previous Cabinet meetings from the 10th of June and the 25th of June. Do members have any comments regarding the shaking of heads? No comments there at all? Yes, please do. Councillor Munns.
Thank you. Just one brief comment. We had some discussion about the financial overspend. There was a really important comment from the CEO, which I think should be minuted, which was, if you want a direct quote, we absolutely did not have this figure pre-election. It's quite an important point that I'd like to have in the minutes, please.
This was a comment made by the Chief Executive.
Correct.
Can I just get confirmation that comment was made before we put it in the minutes?
Of course.
Okay, what I'm happy to do is check the recording, because the whole thing will be recorded verbatim. If it's in the minutes, we'll absolutely put it, or rather, if it's on the recording, we'll be very happy to put in the minutes for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Could you introduce yourself, Richard,
I'm
please?
Richard Clore, I'm Conservative Group Leader. Just on the and I do appreciate it. I wouldn't ever want to get to verbatim minutes, but on the same topic, I asked repeatedly for an explanation as to what actually physically what had caused that extra 6 million increase in the adult social care overspend. We didn't get a satisfactory answer, didn't get a clear answer. Graham made the same point. I do think that needs to be noted as well. That's a really significant issue for this council moving forward. So I'd like it noted that both myself and Graham asked for an explanation and we didn't get one.
No, thank you for that very much. That's not something for the minutes, as you'll appreciate, but I think it's a question that let me finish first. So if it was discussed and debated in terms of the content that you're referring to, then I'd be very happy for it to be in the minutes. But that's not for a moment to ignore the fact that that is a absolutely central question that we need to understand, in part in order to ensure that we don't find ourselves in the same position again. So what I would say, Richard, because I take your point extremely seriously, and I think we do as a cabinet as well, is that, and I'll make this mention this now because it really is important, that we are moving to weekly meetings of a senior group of the council to review exactly what actions need to take place leading up to ensuring that we have a financial structure that, in my opinion, is fit for purpose, And I think part of that discussion will include a reflection on the question that you've just asked. So I'm very happy to share that with you. I think we're meeting possibly face-to-face sometime next week as part of the monthly update. So if you're happy for us to discuss that, please feel free to share that with anybody that you wish, of course. But it's a question that is on my mind, on my colleagues' minds, I can assure you, as much as it's on anybody else's mind, Richard. Can we move on from the minutes? Thank you very much indeed. We have no further comments. I would like to move that we approve the minutes. Can I have a second, please? I think John was first up, so all those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move to item 3, which is declarations of interest. I don't think there are any declarations of disposable interest that I'm aware of. Which will lead me on to leaders' announcements. The first leaders' announcement is that my colleague, Councillor Foster, needs to leave the meeting relatively early, so we're going to just rejig the agenda. Nothing particularly dramatic, but we'll take the bat mitigation paper ahead of the local plan, sorry, ahead of the council plan, I should say. So that's my first announcement. My second announcement is that I'm very, very pleased to announce that we have a new Armed Forces champion, which is Councillor Andrew Matthews, who of course has been a member of our Armed Forces, and he was present along with many others at the raising of the Armed Forces Day flag a week or so ago. I'd also like to pay tribute to Councillor Chris Williams, of course, who was the previous Armed Forces champion, for the enormous amount of work that he did in that role. And there's just 2 other quick announcements. The first is, as members may be aware, that we had a very, very positive outcome to the first hurdle, if you like, in terms of our local plan examination, in terms of the duty to cooperate. So that has been a very positive outcome, and we look forward to further, looking at Nick at this point in particular, further positive outcomes in terms of our local plan examination moving forward. And then the final thing I'd like to say is I had a fascinating evening last night with the hippos at Longleat, as you do, the opening of the new hippo house, the new hippos. I have the photographic evidence to prove it. I was almost eaten by a hippo, which might be a horror for some, but probably almost good news for others. But of course, it's a fantastic example of one of our most outstanding tourist attractions, of course. So, and we are very, very keen to support our tourist and visitor attractions. So that's it in terms of announcements, other than to say I'm delighted that I think we have 3 work experience people with us in the room today, Elliot, Charlotte and Laura. And I think that Elliot's actually going to speak as part of public participation. So Elliot, if you'd like to come forward first, and then we will take the other speakers as per the agenda. Elliot, welcome to Wiltshire Council.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to thank Wiltshire Council firstly for this opportunity to do work experience, and I'm looking forward to see what plans Wiltshire Council have for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elliot. You're very, very welcome along with your colleagues, and I hope you have a really, really fantastic time here at Wiltshire Council. We've got 2 questions in relation to public participation. We've got other questions, statements in relation to items on the agenda. But what I'd like to call first, we have a question from Joseph Quinn. Joseph has had a response. I'm not sure if Joseph is here. No, he isn't. Okay. We have a question from Councillor Mike Sankey regarding the Melksham News. I think Mike and I thought this question would come up in September. So Mike, in fact, is working today. But I've written to Mike and I will provide the answer, and that is this, that I'm hoping to meet with the Wiltshire Publications team in the next couple of weeks. I'm very open to a discussion about whether we can work with them in terms of the issue of TROs. I'd like to congratulate our new temporary Director of Place, Sam Howes, and I've already met with her this morning, and I will be talking to officers very shortly about what we can do in a very creative and inclusive way in terms of this issue. I'm going to move on to a statement request from Andrew Nicholson. So Andrew, would you like to come forward and make your statement, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Andrew Nicholson, and I am in Wiltshire Climate Alliance. I'll speak partly to the Outline Council Plan item on the agenda, but I'd really like to welcome and thank the Council for taking on your work experience. People, Elliot, Charlotte and Laura, I wish them luck in 2050 with the weather, because we know that the climate is changing and Wiltshire is suffering floods, heat waves, storms and the like. I don't want to say anything more until I give a public thanks, which I gave already to the Director and the Cabinet Member for Environment, Climate and Waste, to Councillor Kluwer and his team. Without you, we wouldn't have a strong climate team, possibly any climate team. Without your say-so, we wouldn't have been able to cooperate with your climate and other teams to deliver this climate summit. It was taking a risk on the part of the council to cooperate with an outside organisation with a certain name and reputation to deliver an event into County Hall itself, this remarkable building. So I repeat, thank you very much. I look forward to consensus between the two major parties going forwards on the climate emergency and its importance. The council as an organisation is doing all right on getting to net zero by 2030, but the county target of getting to net zero is in trouble at the moment. As close as possible to that target as soon as possible after 2013. Now, I've read the Liberal Democrat election manifesto. I think you're all cabinet members are climate campaigners, in fact, because climate action and the financial benefits that it can deliver, which we saw on the business day of our climate summit, and we saw on the community day, are crucial in every area of your operation. Let's look at active travel and the benefits that exercise can bring to children, to people who are getting old, to people who need or are going to need care in the next 10 years. And that's the scope of your Outline Council plan, let alone the benefits to air quality. So there isn't a cabinet post that doesn't need to deliver climate action on net zero. Let's take a look at the climate scorecards that were recently issued. There's lots to do here on waste and on transport. I'm pleased to say that we think we'll be able to cooperate on waste in some detail, such as waste collection in narrow historic town and village streets where bin lorries don't have trouble getting through. We can look at piloting the use of electric cargo bikes. We're looking forward to the meetings that we've already agreed to have. On transport, well, your manifesto says reduce car traffic. Those are the first three words on that page of your manifesto. It's a little ridiculous then that if we're going to rely on predict and provide forecasts that traffic will have grown by 2041, that growth will be intolerable to any town or village or the city of Salisbury. I think you know that as elected members. And so to base plans for new bypasses, to base plans for road capacity upgrades on predicting intolerable traffic growth and then providing for it, that's the way to spend big money on transport without investing in what we've had underinvestment in on rail, on active travel, on bus infrastructure and bus services. So I just want to be critical here for a minute. You read this Outline Council plan, environment and climate and net zero are among your priorities. But how many different emergencies has this council declared? Just the one, as far as I know, the climate emergency. And there is a tendency we've seen from our comrades, fellow campaigners nationally and in other local authority areas, for climate to always slither down the agenda to being one of many priorities. So I don't think that the outline council plan does what you intend it to do, which is highlight front and centre and lead the public by informing them and giving them reasons why the council is committed to climate action and that this may have impacts on their lifestyle. And those hopefully will be changes for the better. So I look forward to the consultation on the outline council plan. And thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak, Councillor.
Andrew, thank you very, very much indeed for your contribution. I was at the Saturday, as you'll be aware, of the Climate Summit. I think it's very clear that our position is very similar to the position of the previous administration on this issue, and that we continue to be supportive. I think I used the phrase in the chamber on the day of you holding our feet to the fire, and that's exactly what I know you'll do. And I look forward to significant comments and thoughts in relation to the council plan, not just in terms of the preamble that we're discussing today, but in terms of the real detail that's due to come forward. So, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to move us on to a new feature, certainly for the past 4 years, a new feature, and that is an opportunity for backbench members to ask questions but hang on, I'm going to come to you first, Councillor Holder, so I'll be with you. I just want to give a little bit of explanation for those that are listening and watching, that we will provide a 20-minute session at each cabinet meeting. My colleague to the right will keep his phone on, so we stick to that timescale. And as I've said now on copious occasions, this is an opportunity to ask questions about the business of Wiltshire Council. If we can't answer the question, I'm hoping we can for Councillor Holder. If we can't, then we will come back to you. We will have further conversation. But I'm just very aware, as somebody who was a backbench member for 12 years, that the opportunities to really question in detail the administration can be few and far between, particularly in terms of if issues arise that don't provide an opportunity for a written question. So I'm going to open the floor. I'm going to go straight to Councillor Holder, who I know wanted to ask a question at the last cabinet, which wasn't possible. So if you'd like to come forward, Councillor Holder, you'll be the history-making first person to ask a question in this session. Councillor Holder.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Nick Holder, the councillor for Bower Hill. Thank you, Councillor Thorne, for asking me to be a history maker. It's not often when you get to my age that you're still making history, so I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I'm hoping that on the basis that I think we kind of had a bit of to and fro last time, that you might be aware of the issue I want to raise here today. But I think I also want to direct my comments and my questions to Councillor Belcher, because it was actually Councillor Belcher's intervention and her press release that she sent to the Wiltshire Times and the Melksham News that has kind of prompted this question. And I'm sorry if this is going to be a bit sort of sequential, but I just want to raise an issue that has caused a problem locally for my residents in Bower Hill, but I think it potentially highlights a broader issue of the council and its communication, both with its councillors and its residents. So I'd just like to set some context, if I may. Okay. So this relates to some activity that's taking place with regards to the depot strategy, and in particular the old golf course at RAF Melksham. I was aware in December of last year, as were other members of the previous administration as part of the Depot Strategy Steering Group, that there was a plan to carry out some examination of the land, including a radiation survey. I was made aware of that in December. There's no complaints about that at all. What surprised me is that even though there was, and there is, written evidence of this, even though it's in January earlier this year, it became apparent that above normal levels of radiation had been found on the site. This was not communicated to the steering group. There was a presentation from the steering group to Cabinet Liaison on the 21st of January this year, in which there was an oblique reference to the surveys that were to be carried out, but yet again, there was no specific comment about radiation had been found. The first that the local community knew about this was when a local resident emailed to the parish council clerk, a local resident of the parish emailed the parish council clerk a copy of a permit application that this council had made to the Environment Agency. I find that staggering, that was not anything that was communicated through the depot strategy group, was not communicated to the then cabinet, was not communicated to me as the local member, because as part of the depot group I had two hats, and was not communicated to the parish council. I find it frankly quite worrying that something as important as an Environment Agency permit to carry out remediation of radiation on a piece of land in this county was only found out because a member of the public happened to go on the Environment Agency website and found the permit. I don't know what the process is for whether indeed there is a process for confirming about Environment Agency permits. It certainly didn't come out in the weekly list that comes out from planning. So maybe there is an issue there in terms of something needs to be looked at that should this issue arise somewhere else. So yes, Councillor Thorne and Councillor Belcher, it's very concerning that had this member of the public not found this, I wonder whether we actually would have known about this activity taking place. What then happened is that the parish council did try to contact, did contact the officers here for an update, and at the same time contacted the Environment Agency. A Teams meeting was held between the parish council and the Environment Agency. Nobody from the council was able to attend. This was in June, so this was after the election. And it was the Environment Agency who forwarded to the parish council the various permits and method statements. So again, why would the Environment Agency send that information to the public? Surely that should have come from the local authority. And it really concerns me that there appears to be, I'm not making any suggestion, there appears to be a decision to have been made from the officer who found the radiation, from the officer who contacted the Environment Agency and submitted the permit, to not communicate with the local community, with me as the local member, and then with the steering committee from the depot strategy. It has caused some concern locally as to what else is there. What are they not telling us? Now, I appreciate that Councillor Belcher, as I said, issued a statement to the Wiltshire Times and the Melksham News, explaining that the radiation levels are higher than normal, so some activity needs to take place. And within the permit activity, there is very clear information that says that the radiation will be taken away, but for a period of time, there'll be Harris fencing, excavation will be taking place, but people shouldn't be concerned about it. Now, I've had a look at what the radiation is, and I would agree with some of the comments that are made by the experts that it's not particularly dangerous to the public. But I think the way that we've handled it as a council suggests that there is something being hidden here. And I just wonder how this council feels about the fact that when the radiation is, particularly given what Andrew Nicholson just said, are we comfortable with the way that this radiation is going to be remediated? Some of it is going to be buried and some of it is going to be incinerated. And that's how the Environment Agency are intending to deal with this issue. My broader issue is, and I'd make a request that should this situation occur again, should this situation continue to be an issue as the site is developed for the depot and we find more issues that are going to cause concern to the residents of Bower Hill, who I represent, that the communication from the depot strategy through the comms team to the local community is vastly different to what has taken place at the moment. I find it unacceptable. I find it worrying. My residents are still concerned. There was a letter in the Melksham News this week where there's been a clear misunderstanding of what the statement has said. Somebody has written to the Melksham News saying Wiltshire Council has been let down, Bower Hill has been let down again by Wiltshire Council, and I'm paraphrasing, it's in the public domain. I'm sure Councillor Hubbard has read it because I know he's a voracious reader of the Melksham Independent News because he features so many times in it himself. But there is a letter in there saying that, you know, we are burying radiation on the site and we should be objecting to this, and there's a planning application there. So I would ask that maybe some additional communication goes out. I was contacted by a number of residents within minutes of the article going to press saying, what the hell is going on? Why are we burying radiation on the site? So we've managed to close that down. But my point, Councillor Thorne, is can we please find out why this was known in January, why this was not communicated through the depot strategy meeting, why this was not communicated to me as the local member, why this was not communicated to the parish council who look after the residents, and why we've had to find out in a roundabout way from a resident and then the parish council having to go to the Environment Agency. There seems to me in this matter there is a complete lack of transparency. And I know in your plan you talk about transparency and communication. So please, as I am the history maker, as you said, please can I ask that this also makes history, that the transparency needed to assure our residents that there is nothing going on here that they need to be aware of from a health perspective is dealt with seriously. And I'm really happy for you and your colleague to send me a detailed written response once you've found out what's gone wrong. Thank you.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for that. I have to say that this is exactly why we've instituted this 20-minute session, because otherwise you would have written or you would have called and you wouldn't have had an opportunity to raise this in, other than the full council, one could argue, the most important public forum that we have as a council. I could give you a litany of other issues. We had a situation in Salisbury fairly recently with a hand grenade that was pulled out of the river through magnetic fishing, which required the leisure centre to be closed for the day. And I've got a funny feeling there may have been residents that were asked to leave their homes. I'm not sure the ward councillor, divisional member, was informed of that. And I've had numerous experiences, as we all will have done, in terms of highways issues, where I think we are notified of road closures, but we're not notified when there are major pieces of roadworks, which can often cause far more problems. So I've already raised the issue of a new protocol which engages all members on issues of this nature. So I couldn't disagree with the word that you've offered in terms of the fact that you should have known, that the community should have been aware. I mean, I'm very assured and reassured that the level of, I think Helen will make this point as well, that the threat to the community was as tiny as it possibly can be. But I completely accept the criticism that if you create a vacuum without any information, of course, what tends to fill the vacuum is concerns and worries and residents being particularly concerned. So I think that you make an excellent case, if you don't mind me saying. I think that we need a protocol. I'll come back to your question directly in a moment, but we will have a protocol which I think I'd quite like to take through our scrutiny process, if we may. I'm looking at Graham in the background there, to make sure that members across the council are one, happy with it, and two, gather more assurance in terms of a regular engagement across the piece. And I'm very happy as leader of the council to come back to your direct question, that is to understand what the process was, or as you suggest, what the process wasn't, what the experience has been, what the outcomes have been, and frankly, what we could have done, I say we collectively could have done better on this particular issue. So I'm going to pass to Helen. But if you want to come back with any comments, questions, Nick, you're very, very welcome to do so. Councillor Belcher.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Nick, for a very detailed and thorough explanation of the situation. I think it is worth saying at the outset that the additional radiation found on the site is extremely low. It's equivalent to a dental X-ray a year. I would suggest it's probably similar to driving across Bodmin Moor. So I think that we need to be very careful about not trying to raise alarm amongst members of the public when it is within a kind of normal tolerance of what people can expect to be exposed to. And I think that probably was why decisions were made not to inform certain people. Your history is very good. The issue was first raised in outline back in January 2024, when there was some preliminary investigations on that old golf course, and it was reported, as you say, to the Depot Strategy Group, which yourself, Councillor Munns and Councillor Blair Pilling were part of. So, although I appreciate that it might not have been specifically pointed out that it was a radiation issue at that point, I think there has been mitigation put on site. I'm assured that the process to apply for the permit is a routine process, as it happens in many cases across the county on different sites. There is a communication strategy. I think we'll need to review that communication strategy as a result of this. And so officers have been asked to undertake a review of how they conduct informing relevant councillors when issues like this arise. And I think that issues like exposure to radiation clearly will raise concerns with members of the public because it sounds very scientific, and we need to work harder in terms of assuring people about the level of risk and calming things down, but as well as respecting the level of risk and understanding that there is there. So we need to balance that with with telling members everything. I mean, I think there is a desire to have a good, thorough understanding of everything that's going on within your particular ward, and I certainly feel that in my division as well. But we need to make sure that we're not overloading our officers by getting them to communicate all the time as opposed to actually doing some work. But the issues you raise are live. I've asked officers to undertake a review into how issues like this are communicated, what the thresholds are, and so on.
Nick, if you want to come back, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Helen. I completely understand the point in terms of what you've said around not needing to communicate with every member about every single local issue. I think I want to reiterate the point, if I may, that this should not, in my opinion, this should not have taken a member of the public to inform the local community that there was an investigation taking place and above normal levels of radiation had been found. I completely accept what all the evidence has said from the experts and the comments about it's a equivalent to having a dental x-ray, but there have been people who have walked that site 7 days a week for many years. Whilst it is not a public open space, there are dog walkers who up until very recently have walked on that site every single day. So, if they were exposed to a dental x-ray every single day, certainly when I go to the dentist go behind a LED screen when I'm having my x-rays done. So there was clearly some precautions that dentists have taken to prevent themselves from the radiation. I'm less concerned about the level of radiation and what it is, although, when you do look at some of the scientific details, it does take a long time to decay, and it can lead at some point, overexposure for any radiation can lead to some health risks. Accept your point about we can't communicate on every single thing. I understand that. My concern is twofold, is that this was not communicated through the depot strategy that it had been found. The report, the permits clearly say that it was identified through a walkover in January 2025. There were meetings subsequent to that. To my knowledge, and I've checked my notes and checked the minutes, there was nothing mentioned specifically there. There was certainly nothing mentioned about needing the Environment Agency to get involved and dispose of it. So that's my first point about kind of the internal communication through the depot strategy. I reinforce my second point. I think given worried people get about things like radiation, we should have just had a better communication locally. And whether that had gone out as a briefing to the parish council and to myself, I think that would have been fine. But I accept that it hasn't worked out in the way you'd want it to. I will look forward to hearing from Ian when he's conducted, and you, when you've conducted your examination as to what went wrong. And I'm really, really happy to wait to hear that response. And I would ask, as the local member, specifically if there is anything else that comes up regarding this depot that is going to scare the natives of Bower Hill, that respectfully I'm made aware of that so I can prevent letters being sent to the local press that are factually inaccurate.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for that. So a number of points. One is better communication. That's clearly not been the case in this instance, and it's something that we find on a regular basis would be my point to you. One and two, we will come back to you having looked carefully at the process, because if we don't get the process right, then it will happen again. And three, again, through the good offices of Graham and his scrutiny team, we will come forward with a proposal, which, as Helen quite rightly says, can't cover every issue. There are often, of course, as you'll appreciate at Wiltshire, lots of issues that involve people, and that will remain private and so forth. But there are other issues, and you've highlighted one this morning, that we should be sharing with members, and I've highlighted a couple of others too. So that will be done through scrutiny. We'll come back to you in terms of the wider piece, in terms of how collectively we got to where we are. And certainly I will be disappointed if we aren't keeping you informed specifically on this particular site, because, as I say, we don't want to frighten the residents of Bower Hill or indeed any other part of the county. So, and the last point from Helen.
Yeah, just one quick technical point, Nick. It's not a dental x-ray every time you walk out on site. It's if you walked out on site every day in a year, you would receive the equivalent of one dental x-ray. So again, we need to be very careful about using alarmist type headlines.
Are you happy with that? Okay, I've got a minute for another question, so you're going to have to be really, really quick.
I will make it very brief. Thank you. I want to draw reference to the member update email that went out on the 27th of June, which rightly reported that the previous administration's tough stance on fly tipping had won national awards and recognition. And the piece goes on to say that while fines remain an option, we will now adopt an education and awareness-based response for first-time incidents. So the question very simply, why the softening of the previous tougher stance on fly tipping?
Do you know, I'm really glad you've asked that question, because I take full responsibility for that decision. And let me give you the background to this. And I think other members have had a similar experience. I had a lady in my ward, and she lives in a terraced house. They don't have wheelie bins. I think they have bags that the material goes in. She lives very close to the Green, if you know Carn at all, the Green in Carn, which has a waste bin. She took some items of waste, which unfortunately for her included an item with her name and address on, and she put it in the bin. And I take at face value what people tell me, one has to do this. Some of that material found its way out of the bin. She was then interviewed under caution. She admitted what she did, and she couldn't not given the details of her name and address on that piece of paper, and she was fined by Wiltshire Council £1,000. Now, frankly, I was astonished by that. Others I've spoken to are quite astonished by that. I wouldn't have had a clue that putting some bits of my own personal waste into a waste bin would lend me or take me to that situation. She was in tears. I don't think she'd ever come across the law in any shape or form before. Her only way of seeking any further action, which of course would have failed given what I've just said, would have been an appearance in the magistrates' court. So I took the personal view that in those instances where you have individuals who are not aware of how the law works, where you have, and that's not necessarily a defence, I would accept that, but where they have quite innocently put a few items into a bin, which is what bins essentially are for. That's how most people would see it, and hence that's why we have this new policy. So I don't take any, I don't take away for a moment the need to ensure that we are highly energised around commercial fly tippers, around people who are intentionally fly tipping, and they deserve the highest possible penalties. But for what I regard as an individual member of the public who had no idea she was breaking the law, I felt that our position on that was wrong, and that position is now changed. Just one more, then we're going to have to move on.
Sure. Could you, I think it's an interesting case to use there. Can you just reassure us then that this will not be a blanket approach, education and awareness for all first-time offenders, regardless of the scale of the fly tipping, if you like?
And I think that's a really, really good point that you make. So regardless of the scale, no, this is a case-by-case basis. But I have to say, one of the reasons I came into politics was to address what I thought was injustice. And this was a bit of injustice that I absolutely saw and couldn't allow myself not to act on. So we're at the end of the 20 minutes. Thank you very much indeed for the contributors, particularly to my good friend from Bower Hill for his intervention. So thank you for that, and we'll come back to you. We're now going to move on to the body of the agenda. And as I said earlier, we're moving the Trowbridge and Westbury bat mitigation strategy up the agenda so that Adrian can depart. So I'm going to turn to Adrian to introduce the report. Adrian. I beg your pardon, somebody's... Yes, so I'm intending to allow... No, Adrian will make his statement. So he's going to introduce the report. Then I've got a number of speakers who are ready to make their statement. So I'll bring the speakers in at that. No, you won't miss out, I can promise you that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Approval is sought of Wiltshire Council for the new Trowbridge Westbury bat mitigation strategy. This will replace the current Trowbridge bat mitigation strategy in order to bring what we now call the TWBMS in line with the Council's other mitigation strategies pertaining to European sites. It proposes that the TWBMS will not compromise a supplementary planning document, previously called an SPD. Unlike the TBNS, this has been agreed with Natural England. The current strategy was produced to provide a clear and detailed approach to addressing the mitigation impacts of developments in Trowbridge area, particularly arising as a result of the Wiltshire Housing Strategic Allocation Plan. On the Bath and Bradford and Avon Bat Special Area of Conservation, sometimes quoted as a SAC, and was anticipated to be reviewed to support the emerging local plan review, which in here it mentions it's a draft, but it is now, as we heard, gone past the first stage. The revised strategy will support delivery of planned growth in Trowbridge and Westbury by ensuring that adequate and appropriate mitigation is delivered to address the potential of effects on the sensitive woodland bat sites that are functionally linked to the SAC. The strategy covers impacts to sensitive bat habits and or recreational pressures on the woodlands generated primarily by new residential developments, and it will be titled the Trowbridge and Westbury Bat Mitigation Strategy. The proposal changes to include an extension to the medium risk bat sensitive zones, which are yellow on the draft, to ensure that the mechanism is in place to secure appropriate and adequate mitigation for planned growth in Westbury as well as Trowbridge, and a revised high-risk bat-sensitive zone, 600-metre exclusion red zone, which now applies around the core roosts of the round wood. The TWBMS specifies that the strategic habitat mitigation can be delivered within a wider bat habitat improvement zone, as shown in the maps within the paper A and B. New development of greenfield sites located within the yellow medium risk bat sensitive zone to provide developer contributions towards strategic habitat mitigation via a planning obligation. Residential developments will now pay £972 per dwelling, and that's rather than coming out of SIL money. For all other development types, a lump sum of £29,137 per acre will be a contributing factor. New residential developments proposed for 50 or more dwellings within the grey hatched medium recreational risk zone will generally be expected to provide a substantive alternative natural green space, commonly known as a SANG. Sufficient natural recreation focused green spaces or a financial contribution towards a SANG or sufficient green space. New residential development proposals for less than 50 dwellings within the grey hatch medium recreational risk zone will be required to provide a financial contribution, as I mentioned, of £925 per dwelling towards the Council's strategic recreational pressure mitigation schemes. This represents a move away from using community infrastructure levy, as I previously mentioned, to deliver this mitigation. The revised fees for the strategic habit mitigation apply to all outline and fulling applications yet to be determined. The new requirements for the recreational or mitigation will apply to all planning applications except in the WHASAP sites. They are all currently under consideration or which are yet to be submitted. If approved by the Cabinet, the revised strategy will be adopted with immediate effect after the full Council and support the local draft plan, which is in examination at the present moment.
Adrian, thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to statements. I've got two statements from Celia Beckett. I think you're here, Celia. Yes, you're here. And I'm wondering if you would like to add anything further, which I think you will, to the responses that you've had. So, Celia, fire away.
I presume you're referring to the two questions that I made?
Absolutely.
Yes.
If you'd like to add further detail or raise other issues, I'm very happy for you to do so now.
What I wish to do is make a separate statement. I don't need to add to the questions.
Then I'm very happy for you to do that. Please
Okay,
carry on.
thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. I'm Celia Beckett. I'm the chair of Hilperton Area Action Group, working with Hilperton Parish Council on the local plan. Why is this policy so important to Hilperton? All of Hilperton Parish is in the yellow zone of the TBMS. Policy 53 in the local plan constitutes 75% of the Trowbridge local plan for residential development. Policy 3 for the reserve areas for future growth extends over 300 plus hectares in Hilperton, all on greenfield sites. Our main concern with the TWBMS is that despite this, it lacks detail regarding the Hilperton local plan area. So firstly, I wanted to point out that on figure 2 on page 12, this is supposed to show the site allocations in the local plan, but instead shows the Wiltshire Housing site allocations for 2020. There is also no map of the reserve sites. It's important to consider the overall picture of the impact on the bat population from current and future plans because of the danger of fragmentation in the area and loss of connectivity. A further local plan is also anticipated in the next couple of years. Secondly, Policy 53 is a plan for 600 houses in the yellow zone and is functionally related to the special area of conservation as indicated in the appropriate assessment. The strategy states that development in the yellow zone should be at a lower density, but there is no definition of low density in the strategy, which poses risk. The statement of common ground, number 35, between the promoters and Wiltshire Council indicates that there will be more pressure for more houses here and in the wider area. Also, in the wider area, Barrett's application at Maxcroft Farm, site 3541, is for 180 houses. The site is 6.27 hectares. At a definition of low density of 20 houses per hectare, it should be 125 houses and less with adequate on-site mitigation. Thirdly, there is no emphasis in this report on the important corridor which runs down towards the canal and the river in Hilperton and the ancient hedgerows, byways and lanes that crisscross this area. Natural England has emphasised this in its response to a planning application and in its response to Regulation 19. It is well known to bat recorders specialists how important these riparian corridors are. There is currently only one buffer zone on the east of Policy 53 along the byway. Fourthly, there is one survey in the public domain on the area north of Devizes Road, part of Policy 53, but public access to surveys on the rest of the site has been refused, despite the emphasis on back surveys at all stages of the development. The planning application for the land north of Devizes Road was turned down on ecological grounds, and both Natural England and the bat expert Keith Cohen raised issues about the need for more protection for the Annex 2 bats. Fifthly, we've already seen a large area of yellow zone built over on Elizabeth Way and the removal of hedgerows and no apparent enforcement of mitigation other than a financial contribution. Finally, there needs to be better communication with the local community regarding the protection of local wildlife. Why are we not consultees to this plan? We have been asking questions, raising issues for 4 years about the protection of the bats and have repeatedly been dismissed and reassured that all is well and they are protected because there is a 7-figure sum to protect them. We have no confidence that their future is safe unless this policy is properly enforced. Thank you.
Celia, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to pass to Adrian. I might bring Nick in on this as well, the Director of Planning, but Adrian first. Adrian.
Oh, thank you. Can I call you Celia?
Yeah, of course you can.
Thank you, Celia. I appreciate your contribution. It's invaluable. You've mentioned quite a few very specific details, so I will refer back to the planning department and and get your direct answers on those, especially with the planning application 3541, which is the Barrett Homes one, because there will be a reason, but obviously we need to look into the planning application for time the answers to that one. But we are committed to making sure the bat mitigation strategy works for the environmental and for the population. There is a plan to have a SANG. We need to have any recreational that's put in within reasonable distance of these developments. Otherwise, we're not drawing the public away from the bats where they are. So that takes a little time and strategy to put in place. Also, buying land for a SANG takes a little time, as we know with most of the developments and dealing with landowners, they take a long time before they even start as well. But I'm reassured by the officers that the bat mitigation strategy is working. We're intending to put more than 100% of the hedges and the trees that are needed to mitigate these. We will continue to look at the environment with a very positive view.
Thank you.
Celia, before I ask you to come back, I'm just going to look to Nick. I mean, I think the essence of what you're saying is how can we manage the conflict, if there is a conflict, between protecting the bats in particular, as well as building houses, and how on earth we make that process work. And so I'm going to turn to Nick just to help us think that one through, Nick, please.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the local plan, clearly that's going through examination at the moment, and the inspector will consider the representations that I know that residents and interest groups have made as part of that, and will consider obviously the impact on ecology and mitigation as part of that process. And that may result in changes to policy or the allocation. It may result in changes to things like densities, etc., that comes through that process. So we need to let that run its course, and those hearings will be later on this year, and residents, of course, will be given the opportunity to participate in that process. In terms of planning applications, clearly we're going through a transition phase. We had the Trowbridge bat mitigation strategy, so applications that came in at that stage would have been considered against that as a material consideration, as a supplementary planning document. Clearly, when this is adopted, that will replace the Trowbridge bat mitigation strategy, and this will then become a new material consideration. So at the time, obviously, planning applications will be assessed against that. Obviously, some relevant and technical points that have been raised, and we need to probably go away and just give that some thought. I know Sarah probably will want to do that with her team as well. So that's probably as much as I can say for now, but as I say, happy to we go away and just consider those points in more detail.
Thank you. Celia, would you like, I'm sure the answer is yes, would you like to come back?
I don't want to keep you too long, but I just would like to just stress that getting the maps right is really important. Otherwise, you as councillors don't know what you're looking at. And I think I sent in the detailed map. I mean, if anyone looked at the map of the proposed development to Hilperton, they would see what an enormous problem it is. It's going to totally engulf the whole area. And, it's constantly been expanded as well with no consultation. So I think it's really important that you as a new councillor are aware of just how grave this problem is for Hilperton and how unhappy residents are. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I have to say, I met with your divisional member, Councillor Ernie Clark, the other day, talking about, with Nick and others, talking about development issues. So again, he was making some of those more general points that you're making very, very clearly. We will write back to you. We'll come back to you responding to the technical points that you've made. And I'm very happy to have an ongoing dialogue in terms of the issues that you've raised. So thank you very much for joining us. If you've got nothing else to add, I'll leave you to, as it were, head back to the back benches, if that's the way to put it. And I've got also a question or a statement from William Mulholland, if Mr. Mulholland is here. No, there's no Mr. Mulholland. Okay, thank you very much indeed. He will have had a written response to his question. So I'm now going to open the discussion to members of Cabinet before we head off around the room. Is there anything else any members of Cabinet would like to add? I think I've got Councillor Smith this way. No, it's just you were just pointing your fingers up at the heavens. Okay, fine. That's fine. Do be very clear. It's a bit like being in an auction house. You could end up winning something that you don't want to win. Anyway, fine. We've dealt with the Cabinet. I'm going to turn to Councillor Phil Chamberlain as the Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Committee to add any thoughts and comments based on the briefing I think that you had very recently.
Chair, thank you. Phil Chamberlain, so Vice Chair of the Environment Select Committee. And our queries on this actually reflected a lot of what the previous speaker, Celia, said about the application of this strategy. And we queried in terms of why this change was necessary and what the previous policy did and why that needs to change. And the agility of the new document in terms of being able to see a fees change on an annual basis, the fact that it could be more agile in its responses, I think in terms of address some of our questions about its application to make sure it could deliver on what it wants to do. Clearly, we've got a larger area in which the document covers, and it needs to take into account the change dates of the local plan as well. So our questions there are around the application of this policy and its purpose in terms of what it seeks to deliver. I think also in terms of how it changes from a strategic plan document now to a mitigation policy, and that actually is a reflection of how it operated previously, where it might be able to be improved. I think there's always a balance, as we queried, in terms of the needs of developers, the protection for particular species, and that legal requirement of the council to do that. And I think that being able to make sure that that balance can be struck, and actually the way that the council can take on this role in a more strategic way, rather than having 100 individual conversations with developers, but actually have single processes, makes for a more efficient way of delivering. But I think there's ongoing concerns to make sure that there is a focus on that strategy to address those concerns on individual levels. Is it delivering in terms of its mitigation strategy? I would just say that other ways in terms of we'll be going to full council is for the 22nd, so there's a further opportunity for scrutiny there, and I think that the interventions both written here show from the public and ones that we know we reported in show the keen interest that actually, although for a relatively small geographic area, as an example about how we want to make sure that we're protecting that environment, this is a kind of crucial step about how we reflect and do that in a better way. And I think the other bit about the calculations on the developer costs as well, and the fact that they could increase on an annual basis, so these weren't set in stone, but ones that could be looked at and reflected upon to make sure that it could provide a proper mitigation, and one that could be delivered by the council as well. So we were pleased in terms of the details supplied by the officers on this, for the briefing around this strategy, and also for the supplementary questions asked here, because I think it's really shown its sharp division about how this strategy needs to be developed and the complexity that it involves. Happy to take any questions from the councillors.
Phil, thank you very much. Any questions for Phil? Asking anything you want to ask of Phil, anything that we want to respond to in terms of Phil's very comprehensive report? Adrian, would you like to respond to Phil's points, please?
It's nice to hear such a positive message, because I got the same message from the officers about the change is here to becoming a strategy and being more flexible. And it was quite clear that taking money out of SIL was never going to be sufficient to mitigate our needs here. And we have to obviously meet Natural England's requirements to achieve this goal. And so I was satisfied that this change was going to work for now. And I had the same concerns as you did about inflation, because this is a fixed figure. By becoming a strategy, it means that we can actually review it on a more regular basis, more quickly and more efficiently, and ensure that we are meeting those costs. Because we're talking about labour costs here, we're talking about land costs if we're buying and selling. And, you know, you get a development now, but you might not put the strategy in place because it takes time to arrange and everything till years later. And as you see with all these building projects like HS2, they become much more expensive at that point of actually doing them than the funds you've raised. And so this gives us that opportunity to ensure what we do commit to, we will be able to achieve.
Thank you, Adrian. Paul, you were nodding, but I don't think in a way that you wanted to speak.
Yes, it was actually.
Oh, then off you.
I was waiting for someone to speak up in favour of the bat mitigation strategy, and in support of the excellent presentation that's been given by Adrian earlier. I want to say first of all that I'd like to thank the officers, particularly Emma Fisher and her team or colleagues. And I received a briefing a couple of days ago about this from them, and I think you were there, weren't you? You were both at it. No, it was a very, very thorough and clear presentation on the bat mitigation powers. I just wanted to speak up and say that it was raised by a member of the public earlier, the concern about enforcement, and I think I'd like to reinforce that concern. It is an excellent policy, but we do need to make sure that it is enhanced and that we watch developments moving forward. The reality, of course, is that bats, in this particular case, it's Bechstein's bats. And I did a little bit of research before I came to the meeting, and discovered actually that the Bechstein's bats are very rare, and they are particularly vulnerable because of the type of habitat that they like to be in, which is very much ancient woodland. We used to have a lot of ancient woodland. We don't have as much of it as we do now. Of course, we will start to have more woodland, though not so ancient, if we get to deliver a 20% uplift in the target for afforestation in Wiltshire. So that will go some way, but that will be new woodland. In this particular case, we are talking about ancient woodland. And if anyone is in any doubt at all about the need to protect them, they should reflect on the legal protections which bats in the UK enjoy. They're protected, of course, by the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 as amended, the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017, and it means that it's illegal to deliberately capture, injure or kill a bat, to disturb a bat in a roost, to damage or destroy a bat roost, even if unoccupied, and obstruct access to bat roosts. And I think it's important to draw attention to those because the types of habitat which Bechstein's bats enjoyed, if the nests are destroyed, bats reproduce very slowly. You know, not like rabbits, they're at the other end of the spectrum. You know, they are very, very slow. The enforcement by statutory agencies, like the police, mean that it is a wildlife crime, it is a criminal offence, and penalties include unlimited fines, up to 6 months imprisonment and confiscation of equipment. And I hope very much that our colleagues in law enforcement in the county are clear that when and if this bats are attacked in any way, if criminal offences are committed, that they are investigated and brought before the courts as a matter of urgency. We need to be absolutely clear that, like, you know, we don't want to have excess fly tipping, we don't want wildlife crime in Wiltshire. And I want that message to be very clear. So we'll be looking at ensuring that is followed up. The final thing to say, of course, is that in all of the work which we do with bat mitigation measures like this, is that we are improving our biodiversity for the rest of the animal kingdom as well. It's not just the bats that benefit, it's the birds and the bees and the insects on which the bats feed, which we are seeking to protect. So there are lots of really positive things about this policy which go way beyond bats. And that's why it will have my full support today. Thank you, Chair.
Paul, thank you. You don't just turn up to Cabinet to hear about policy, you discover about a whole new world, particularly about bats and their reproductive abilities. So, Paul, genuine thanks for that. Thank you to Phil. Can I, before I introduce or return to Richard, just thank officers for the enormous amount of work. I think another, as we had, I think, the time before last, another magnum opus, I think is what I would describe it as. And so I'm now going to turn to Richard for his thoughts, comments and questions. Richard.
Yes, Ian, thank you. Broadly, I would welcome this. It's a continuation of what has been a long-running saga from a council perspective, the Trowbridge bat mitigation strategy. Almost no, slightly longer running potentially than the Ashton Park Section 106 and the need for that to be signed, which is referenced in the report. And I could have sworn that was supposed to have been signed about a year ago. Let's hope that there's, well, 10 years ago, whatever. Let's hope this brings us slightly closer to seeing that actually being signed by the developers, because the bat strategy is a critical part of it. And that rather highlights the problem, the challenge that this strategy deals with, which is the distinction between our desire to protect the environment. And I'm afraid, Paul, I don't agree that this policy will improve biodiversity. At best, it will maintain it in different places, and the pressures that come from building. I think we need to be a little more cognizant as an authority of the fact that government policy, very regrettably in my view, is leaning away from the protection of species and far more towards the rapidity of building. I am concerned that will cause challenges, and I would like an assessment perhaps from the Cabinet member officers as to how we are going to respond to potentially serious changes and challenges that come from government policy and the changes to government policy and the way that they're handling mitigation. I wouldn't pretend that we've got it right, as the length of time and the difficulties this policy has incurred over the years shows. But I very much worry that we're going to see a massive loosening of protection of wildlife, and how whether we would be able to mitigate that still at that point. I won't go into descriptions of bat species. We had a great, but perhaps we'll just save it for full council. I do recall a good discussion historically about the different bat species involved and whether we can get the missing one in to Wiltshire, or bat breeding. I think the only other thing I would, okay, it's not to deal with the bat mitigation strategy, but the point was made. I don't think you can have excess fly tipping. Any fly tipping, to my mind, is something that damages nature and therefore needs to be prevented. So again, the suggestion that you can have excess fly tipping, I find a bit strange. But I'm off topic. Let's stick with bats.
Richard, thank you very much. I'll ask Adrian to comment. You make a point about the broader pressures that we are facing and will face in terms of substantially additional housing numbers. I suspect we're not very far apart in terms of our mutual concern, and the balance between conserving, preserving and supporting wildlife, and the number of homes that we are expected to build. I'm very keen that we are, as a council, much more proactive around consultations, as much as it's going to make any difference to anybody, but I think that we at least need to be speaking as one voice across the council, and there'll be more work around that. But I'm going to go to Adrian just to pick up on the points that Richard's made.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pick up on Paul's point as well, if that's okay. Thank you for your positive contribution and your background reading on the Bridgetown bats, because it is quite interesting. Yes, you're quite right. It is the police that will enforce any issues that come about because people aren't behaving as much as we would like them to. But I am pleased to say that we do. I'm reassured by the officers that we have in place wardens who are actually coaching the locals. They're going into the woodlands and having barbecues and fires. And rather than we're using the carrot approach as you did with your fly tipping, we're trying to educate and train people to the damage and that they're doing to the environment there, and encouraging them to use the mitigation parks that we're putting in place instead. So there's some positive front work being done, as well as the bashing for getting it wrong at the end as well. And I think education is very important in these. And I would agree with Richard on government policy, but what we then have to do as a local authority is to mitigate that as much as possible as we can, with the interest that we here in Wiltshire have in our environment. It's such an important aspect of our county. We must continue to do so. And there are other issues, as you quite rightly point out, like the nutrient neutrality laws, that looks as though they're weakening as well. And all these things will have an impact on our fish, our environment and everything. So we, as a county, can still try and do the best we can to make sure our environment is the best it can be for not just the residents, because they do need housing, but we can protect it with things like this bat mitigation policy and strategy we've got in place. So I would agree entirely with a lot of what you said, Richard, but it's up to us to make sure we do the best we can with what hand we're dealt.
Thanks, Adrian. Richard, come back, please.
Sorry, perhaps I wasn't being quite clear enough. My concern is that government policy will result in this strategy being pretty much made pointless by changes in policy. We have a good understanding of the direction of government travel. We don't have the specifics. If you look at some of government consultation at the moment, the specifics are quite hard to get to. I was looking at the fair funding formula consultation, and my goodness, that makes your head hurt. But do we have an idea about what the impact of what are very clear directions of change for government policy will have on this strategy, and whether they'll basically obviate it in the next few months?
Richard, I think that's a question for Nick, I sense. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chair. The honest answer is I don't think we do. It's absolutely right that the speed of change from government to deliver more and more homes seems to be taking precedent over environmental matters. Completely agree with that point. We've seen a raft of ministerial statements, emerging policy, new legislation coming through. It seems every 5 minutes we have a new consultation to respond to from MHCLG, which in many respects does make it more challenging to deal with environmental issues. I think all we can do from a council's point of view, we need to work with our colleagues from other authorities because they'll be dealing with similar issues. We need to lobby our MPs to make representation on our behalf, and we need to respond robustly to these consultations so that our concerns are expressed at the right time when the detail does emerge. But yeah, I share the concerns. It's been happening for a while now, and I think it's a little scary, I guess, in terms of policies that we're trying to put in place to protect the environment and the difficulties that we're finding to implement those policies when other issues are taking precedent.
Thanks, Nick. And we are meeting our county MPs on Friday. It's part of the regular update and discussion and so forth. Richard, anything else you want to add? Thank you very much for that. Is there anything else anybody else would like to add? Nobody's jumping up and down. Thank you very much indeed for that discussion. I'm going to ask Adrian to read out the proposals. I think they're just long enough to be worth reading out. Thank you to Phil for his contribution. Take us through the proposals, Adrian.
So my proposal to the Cabinet is that we recommend full council approves this proposed Trowbridge and Westbury bat mitigation strategy to support the draft local plan and to ensure delivery of the appropriate mitigation for plan-led development, to ensure no adverse effects on the integrity of the Bath and Bradford and Avon bats SAC, and that the functionality linked woodlands to the east and the south east of Trowbridge. And secondly, that we recommend full council agrees that in accordance with the requirements of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017 as amended and relevant case law, that the revised strategy approach applies to all qualifying developments seeking outline, full reserve matters and discharge of conditions approvals, with the exception of the application for the WHSAP, which Richard referred to, site allocation, and the Ashton Park Urban Extension Outline Planning application. And the third recommendation is that we agree that developers' contributions via planning obligation will be sought from developers wishing to use the council-led mitigation scheme. The revised strategy would be adopted with immediate effect on contributions sought as necessary after full council.
Second. Thank you for that. We've got a proposal second. Are those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. We'll now move on to what was item 6, what is now item 7, which is the council plan. This is very much the starting point of the production of the new council plan based on the manifesto from the election, which will then become the core of the administration's work programme. What we have for Cabinet today is a document that sets out our values. Goodbye, Adrian. Everybody's leaving at this point. But there we go. They're all heading on holiday with you, Adrian, I suspect. So what this document seeks to do is set out our values, our priorities, the things that are core to where we want to take this council, again, taken from the manifesto. And then what will follow later in the year will be the detailed programme, the policies, if you like, and with it will be a set of key KPIs, key performance indicators, so that we are able to monitor the performance of this council plan. This is the first public airing of the document. There will be opportunities for a whole range of statutory partners, community partners, members of council to engage. And of course, I think it comes to, and Graham will correct me if I'm wrong, ONS on the 28th of July for comment through the scrutiny process. I think it's fairly self-explanatory as a document, but again, I just want to absolutely emphasise that this is the preamble, it sets the scene, and then the detail, the body of the document comes later in the year, and of course will come into full council, I think, at the meeting on the 21st of October. So it will be there for discussion and debate in its entirety in October. I'm looking to the increasingly depleted members of Cabinet for any comments or questions. He says, I've got Graham on my list to speak. Do you want to add anything further, Graham?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to say that on page 21, I'm delighted to see that you are going to involve all councillors in this plan, that you are going to particularly invite all select committee chairs and select committees before, during and after, which is great. And as you quite rightly said, it will be at the next OSMC on the 28th of July. We might hope to have a little bit more than just an outline at that point. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm hoping we will, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't want to make promises I can't keep, Richard, as you. But I will do the best that we can. And I'm very, very happy, for example, for things like when we move beyond the discussion and debate around the document, share the KPIs through scrutiny, because I think that they are the key measure as to whether this document is delivering or not. So, but let me try and come with something even more exciting to the meeting at the end of July. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Richard. Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. As you say, there really isn't a great deal to comment on at this point. You've just mentioned KPIs. I was rather expecting from the forward plan to see the latest performance data. I'm now rather concerned from your comment that you're looking at changing performance data. One of the key issues with performance data is you need continuity of data over time to see what impact it's having. So I'd really like to understand why we're not seeing KPIs at the moment and what is going to be happening with regard to them, with regard to that performance data. Because if you're looking at restarting the entire process, I would respectfully suggest that would be a huge error. I appreciate you're a new administration, you want to have your plan. I think I would note that under the current business plan for the council, we have seen outstanding Ofsted, good CQC, good SEND inspections, and all the other delivery that the last flow from the business plan set by the last administration. I personally kind of struggle to see why you changed that, given what it was delivering. But I'm sure you've got your reasons. But I'll wait for detailed comment until we have some detail to comment on.
Thank you, Richard. I'll come to Paul in a minute. I suppose the principal reasons are the reasons that we won as a party more votes than anybody else. We won more seats than anybody else. It would seem very odd. I'm not looking for an argument at this point, Richard, but it would seem very odd for a Liberal Democrat administration to proceed with a Conservative business plan. So, and you'd be criticising me, I suspect, if we didn't do what we're doing, and quite rightly so from an opposition point of view. So I've had significant representations in terms of KPIs, in terms of a review of KPIs. I see no reason why we wouldn't want to do it. I think in terms of our new council plan, we want to test our council plan and ensure that the council plan is delivering. So it would be, again, very odd to retain your KPIs against our council plan. But I'm happy to have further, again, we meet, I think next week, happy to discuss that further. And I will come back to you, because you make a very valid point about the current KPIs and how we will be judging those between now and the application of the new KPIs, if you like. So I think I've got Paul's hand up, possibly, and then Gavin, then I'll come to John.
Chair, this is a moment of unbridled joy on my part, because at last I'm sitting in a cabinet of which I'm a member with you as the leader. We've got the draft plan in front of us, the result of 4 years of hard campaigning and an election. And the people of Wiltshire decided who was going to run the council. And the reason that we haven't got a Conservative plan in front of us here today, thank God, is because the residents of Wiltshire chose to elect us in greater numbers than has ever happened before. So we've got a very significant moral authority to lead Wiltshire, but we've also got an electoral. And they had an opportunity, the members of the council had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to choose as their leader the same again, Richard, or to choose a change for the better. And they chose you. And that's all the authority you need. So for Richard to come here and question why we've put in a policy, I think he's being naive, isn't he, at best. Reality is that we've got a new plan because we won. Now, does that mean to say that we've got all the answers? The answer is no. We've got some way to learn. You know, there's some things out there which residents want to make us aware of over the course of the next couple of weeks. We've had contribution already from the floor today from a resident who was querying why it was within this plan that there wasn't greater recognition of climate change. Okay, I understand that. I'm listening to that. I'm hearing that. That's an issue which we need to perhaps reflect on. And then we'll make a decision as to what we're going to do about that. But I would say that in many ways, as far as my area of responsibility is concerned, I'm very, very happy with the draft words. The enhancing and protecting of our environment for future generations. We protect our environment by reducing waste and carbon emissions, increasing repair, reuse and recycling, and preventing pollution. We support wildlife and will improve biodiversity and will adapt our assets and services so they're prepared for a changing climate. I'm very happy with that. As it stands, I think that's good enough for me. I think that's an answer to the question that was raised from the floor. But you might have noticed, those of you who are interested in graphic design, as indeed I am, and there are other members as well, that throughout our documents that we've produced, there is a green thread. It's white in some places, but it's green where it matters, and that's good enough for me. So as a draft, I think this is excellent. We've still got plenty of things to consider. We've still got some consultation that needs to be done. The issue of the KPIs, there will be KPIs, right? Richard said, oh, well, they're not in there. He's a bit confused as to why they're not. Do not be confused, Richard. There will be KPIs, all right? My promise, it's the leader of the council's promise. There will be KPIs. But I'm very happy with this. I'm very sure that when it comes to the vote in a couple of weeks' time, full council, that it will be endorsed. Thank you.
Thank you. I should just say that it won't be coming to the council in a couple of weeks' time. That'll be the October council, but it will be there to be endorsed in the autumn. Thank you for that, Paul. Gavin, and then we'll go to John.
Well, thank you, Ian. Richard, I do recall 4 years ago when we were discussing the original business plan and some of us were raising questions around it. Your exact words were, well, we won and you lost, which I thought was a rather brutal comment on the electoral arithmetic of Wiltshire. It was correct then, as you will have noted, it's no longer the state now. So this is a good start, I think. The devil will be, of course, in the detail, and it's right and proper that should be the subject of rigorous scrutiny. Richard does raise an entirely valid point on the continuity of certain KPIs, and I would hope that a number of those will be present, and we'll be disappointed if they're not, because they are key performance indicators, and our performance on many of the areas outlined in this document meet the same challenges as the previous administration had to face, not least in my area of responsibility on finance. But there will be some new ones there as well, and I think they will more accurately reflect the needs to measure that really does have an impact on our performance, and perhaps some that have gone before. But let's come to that debate when we may. I'm also very grateful to the officers for their work on this document and the discussions they've had with us, and for the ongoing conversations about how they bring to life the commitments we've made in our manifesto and with and indeed with our good colleagues in the independent group in conversation. as to that we need to deliver for the residents of Wiltshire, its businesses and its wider environment over the next 4 years. And that proof of the pudding, Ian, will be in the eating of it over the course of those next 4 years. I hope what this document also represents, in fact, I'm very confident that it does, as indeed already your introduction of the 20-minute opportunity for backbench members to raise questions with this cabinet, and the commitment to engage divisional members, not only on matters of importance as it impacts upon their communities, but also in trying to look at ways in which we can ensure that they have a greater say, they and their parish councils have a greater say, as well as the great city of Salisbury, of course, on matters which are of direct relevance to them. And one of those commitments is an outstanding one, which again you flagged in the letter that you circulated to all members around Section 106 agreements, around the community infrastructure levy, and looking at ways in which we can match some of these financial commitments from other people's money, importantly, not those of the residents of Wiltshire, in terms of the priorities that we have. So I think it's an outstanding start. We need now to take this on to the next stage, and I look forward greatly to those discussions and to our discussions with our friends in scrutiny, in them doing their job, and with the full council as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. John.
Thank you, Chair. I, of course, come at this slightly differently. I didn't win the last election. My group didn't win the last election. If we did, we wouldn't have been big enough to form a cabinet. However, here I am. And I do view this very slightly differently. And one of the things that saddens me is the fact that before the ink is even wet on the paper, before the ink is even drawn on the paper of the new business plan, we're falling into the political tit for tat on it. And can I just say, Richard, I don't see this as a replacement on the business plan that was here for the last 4 years and the 4 years before that. And I remember 4 years ago a new business plan being brought out, and I remember you telling us how this built on the one previously, and it did. Well, those were the words that you may have used. It may not have been what you meant, but it was what you said. And actually, I do think this does build on a business plan. I think you did have a good business plan for the last 4 years. I think it did deliver outstanding children's services, something that I've been desperate to see in this authority. It did deliver good SEND. It did deliver good adult services results. It didn't deliver certain other things that some of us would have liked, but it did deliver those things. And there's no reason why we can't celebrate that and build on it. But you would, if you were in Ian's seat now, you would be coming up with a new business plan for your next 4 years, okay? And that's what we've got here. Now, the one thing that's very different this time, and I really celebrate over what we've had over previous business plans, is that what the administration are doing is they're saying to all 98 members of the council, how do you want to influence this? And I think that that is a very welcome change. And what I would like to see is all 98 members of the council and all 88 other members from the cabinet actually seizing that opportunity to help shape this business plan and to look at some of the things. And I'll take you to the priorities that are listed in point 8 on page 21 and look at some of the really exciting things that it talks about in there in terms of working better with our communities, building our communities, and the one that I am delighted to see in there, where it says very clearly making Wiltshire child-friendly and providing opportunities for all our young people. Building on the success of the past, delivering a future for our residents they deserve. Let's work as a team this time, because actually, I say this to you, and I say this to my cabinet colleagues, nobody actually won at the last election. Nobody got a majority. Nobody has a right to rule in Wiltshire. Electoral math means that we're like this, and that's good from my perspective and in my belief. But nobody here on this table can take anything for granted like your administration could in the last 4 years. So let's work as a team and deliver for our residents and not spend 4 years throwing stones at each other.
Thank you, John. Just to add a couple of points, I think we've been absolutely clear, and I was in the speech I made at the annual, the annual council meeting. It seems like such a long time ago. That one of the positive outcomes of the electoral mathematics is that we are absolutely forced, and quite rightly so, to work together, which is why I have regular meetings with Richard, regular meetings with Ernie. I've offered regular meetings to Councillor Rimmer. If we can ever get together, regular meetings with Graham, so apologies for last week, Graham, and why I spend a lot of time talking to members right across the piece. And that door into that rather ginormous office is always open to anybody, all 98 members that have a thought, a view, that want to make a contribution. So you're absolutely right. This document is heavily around not just engaging and involving our 98 members, but absolutely engaging our towns, our city, our parishes, our voluntary organisations. Because I think, as all of us will appreciate, particularly given the financial envelope that we find ourselves in, if we are not actively engaging in partnerships, not just around money, but in terms of delivering services, working with local communities, then we are sunk, in my opinion. So thank you for that. I've slightly cut across Richard. I wasn't expecting there to be a sort of lots of speeches from the Cabinet partway through your contribution. So is there anything else you want to add, Richard, at this stage?
Yes, thanks, Ian. Just very briefly,
Yeah,
I absolutely agree. No one won the last election, and therefore there needs to be something that is built ideally by everyone, although the reality of politics can make that challenging. My view of the last business plan, and I'm pretty sure I can recall being perhaps blunter about it, even in public than I should be, that the one before mine was that for a while Wiltshire had business plans that weren't really rooted in data and rooted in very clear priorities, backed up by measured data to ensure delivery. And that was the step change, certainly with the last business plan that we sought to make sure was delivered. I think did deliver. Which probably brings me to the point that's worth making, rather than discussing any of the mechanics around that. I mean, once there is a proper business plan in front, I'll be delighted to comment on it. There isn't one here at the moment to comment on, but I really am worried around the issue of KPIs. Constant monitoring of KPIs, not to beat people up, but to identify where things are going in the right direction, where they are not going in the right direction, and to then make sure that officers are taking steps to address that is critical. And we've seen with some of the issues around adult social care overspend, some of the areas, some of the things that can happen where we're not on top of that data, where we still don't have a handle on what that data actually means. It worries me that between the turn of the year, February, whenever the last set of KPIs came in, it was probably before, no, it should have been February, and October, or beyond October, if we're then looking at a new set of KPIs, this council could be sitting for a year without any formal measuring of data, any data running then to scrutiny committees for them to analyse, for Cabinet to analyse, and that, I think, would be a huge retrograde step.
Oh, go on, John, then I'll finish up.
I'd really like to give Richard an assurance, certainly as far as my department is concerned on this. Okay, we've continued to hold POBs. I was at one the other day where we very robustly challenged and looked at all the data that's in there. All of that information, far beyond the stuff that we're legally obliged to report, as you know, all of that information is made available to the Select Committee, will continue to be made available to the Select Committee. And actually, very, very little of that data was contained within your performance reports anyway. It was always. So that is continuing. The scrutiny of that by both executive and backbench members is continuing. And I think I can safely say from conversations I've had, that is the case across all of the POBs and all of the departments.
I've got Gavin, thank you for that, John, by the way. I'm going to, because he's a very important part of the council, I'm going to go to Graham Wright, then I'll come to Gavin. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say I was disappointed, and thank you very much, John, for clearing it up, because I almost didn't have to come up from what you've said about let's not. It's disappointing to see politics coming in, and it came in directly from one of your cabinet members, and it may be a great joy for him to be here, but it wasn't a joy to hear him having a distinct pop unnecessarily, not talking about your actual plan, but just having a little dig. So enough said. Let's stop it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Graham. I'm going to go to Gavin, then I think we'll... Oh, I'm going Gavin, Martin. I will ask for any comments from the rest of the room, and then I'll just sum up.
Well,
Gavin.
Chairman, because it's Richard raised it around the adult social care, just to again be clear, there are now weekly meetings with our leading officer team, the leader of the council, Councillor King as the cabinet member responsible, and me, to ensure that we are completely on the PRISA project work to get us to the bottom of some of the challenges and issues that we have in that arena, and they will stay at that frequency, as you and I have discussed. Ian, if you're not around, you very kindly suggest I might lead those sessions, and I'm very happy to do so, because that level of scrutiny will be, by us as cabinet, will be intense, and I have no doubt we will be held to account through both these discussions and the scrutiny discussions with the council. So there will be no lack of rigour in that regard.
Thanks, Gavin. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Yeah, I don't have the same rhetorical flourishes that some of my other cabinet members have, but on the subject of KPIs, Richard, you can be assured in my brief on highways and transport that we will be very much carrying on with the POGs. We've got one in the diary for the 29th of this month. We'll be looking at all the KPIs that have been traditionally reported on. And I see if there are any changes to KPIs going forward, it'd be more of an evolutionary process rather than a revolutionary process. So I hope we can reassure you in that regard.
Thank you for that. I think you make a really good point, Richard, in terms of the fact there is the danger of a KPI-free extended period. I think, as you'll appreciate, we can all be pobbed out is possibly one way of putting it. Spend our entire lives in pob meetings, if that's the right phrase. My greater concern, which just touches back on what you were saying, Richard, is in terms of the fact that there needs to be a public discussion around these things as well. So let me come back to you on that, because it's a perfectly reasonable and sensible point, and I'll return to you on that and we'll discuss this further. But I think it's a point well made. Is there anything else? Yes, Councillor Munns.
Thank you. I just want to say very briefly, I'm incredibly pleased that John and Graham picked up on Councillor Sample's frankly arrogant and ignorant comments earlier. He's, to coin the phrase of James O'Brien, he's fallen into the trap of footballification by saying that our team won, so therefore we'll scrap what the other team did. And as a Wiltshire resident, I would be incredibly frustrated seeing that. There are three important words: data, data, data. Decisions, plans should be based on evidence. They should be evidence-led decisions, regardless of what strip someone is wearing, the colour of their scarf.
I'm going to end the discussion there, because we could get into a real fight over this in terms of who said what when. I was the person that Richard directed his "we won, you lost" comment. I sat there, he sat here, but we're not going to take that any further, because that's not what we want to do. And I always look to my friend Graham for advice on these matters. So, colleagues, if I may, I'm going to end the discussion and the debate, and thank you very much indeed for it. I'm going to ask Cabinet to agree the outline council plan for 25-35, the agree to seek feedback, substantial feedback and consultation from a broad range of stakeholders and residents set out in the report, agree to review incorporated feedback and service planning detail at the meeting on the 7th of October in preparation for the final version, to be considered at full council on the 21st of October. Can I have a seconder? I've got lots of seconds I'm going to take.
Could I just ask that in the spirit of the conversation we've had this morning,
yes,
we add to that and we encourage all members to participate? Because I'd be fascinated to see how many do in terms of actually contributing towards it, and then come back later and say that they don't think it represents.
John, I'm delighted to include that as a very, very sensible and helpful. We had a wonderful amendment from Councillor Bridget Wayman, of course, last time. So in the tradition of these things, which we will keep up, I'm sure, on an ongoing basis. So if the stewards made a note of that, those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. Right, we'll move on to item 8, which is the disposal update, and over to Helen.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. This is going to come up probably twice a year. And just to explain to members that what we're doing is we're approving the assets team to look at opportunities for the highlighted sites. So there are 4 sites which have been suggested for us to approve. 1 is a strip of land, 2 are from the housing, the HRA stock, and 1 is a children's centre, vacant children's centre. So if necessary, I can run through each of those, but the first one, the strip of land, is currently a footpath. The landowner who owns the land to the east and west has requested vehicular access and utility rights over this land, partly because he wants to develop the site for residential accommodation. There's still some agreement to be reached around where that access point to the site will be, but it is proposed that we look at selling the whole of that strip of land, but with an obligation that it can only be used as a footpath and a cycle track unless it's provided elsewhere to our reasonable satisfaction. The second and third are HRA stock. Both of these are vacant properties at the moment. Both of these would require considerable amount of investment in order to bring them back up to lettable status. Both of them are actually unusual items of housing stock for our HRA register. So the one in Wilton, for example, is an older house. The one in Barford St Martin is a very detached rural location sitting on top of basically a small hill overlooking a road. So the intention would be to try and look for people to acquire them. Because of the amount of investment required, it is likely that we will not realise the full market potential if they were in tip-top condition. And the fourth is along Leeds Children's Centre. This is a vacant children's centre following changes to the early years service. The adjoining school, Longleat School, has expressed an interest in acquiring the building to further increase what it provides to the local to the local residents. So what we're asking, there's another little point about on the proposal, we're requested to note the progress for capital receipts in the current year. The team have asked me to point out that most of the capital receipts come in Q3 and Q4. So we're still very, very early on in the year. And in fact, the sale which has happened after this report was produced. It was 41k for a sale of a piece of land, which was concluded in the middle of May. So it was after this report was pretty much finalised. So happy to take questions.
Thank you, Helen. Any comments, questions from Cabinet? No? Gavin.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you, Helen, for the paper. If I could just draw colleagues' attentions, please, to paragraph 28, which acknowledges the role that the previous and now no longer with us because of the creation of our new scrutiny committee on finance, the Financial Planning Task Group, which looked at this whole process some 4.5 years ago and made comment about how the mechanism of consideration of asset disposal could be enhanced and improved. And I'm grateful for the fact that indeed was taken forward. And that, of course, as and when these assets are sold, this does have an impact on the finances of the council. And that's an important feature as to some degree of flexibility on asset disposal. In terms of not only the recognition of the monies, but in how they might be deployed. And then finally, for colleagues who are trying to work their way through how this all works, who may be new to the council, you'll see the process in Appendix 1. And I also welcome the fact that this will now come here twice a year, allowing colleagues and officers to get on with what they need to do, while providing that degree of transparency. in an open forum as to what's now being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm just going to add a couple of other points. Gavin's touched on the finances, and I think in terms of our strategic disposal strategy, I think we are, as a council, aiming to realise something like £1 million worth of income from the sale of assets over the course of the medium-term financial strategy. I'm also aware that there are tens of millions of pounds that are needing to be spent on so-called assets that we have as part of the estate. So I would just encourage colleagues to recognise the financial envelope and the financial realities of what we face. I don't think there's any scrutiny around this, according to my brief, with Graham saying no. So I'm going to turn to Richard for any comments he may have. Richard.
Yes, thank you. I think the first and fourth of these are fine. It's the sort of normal disposal effect. The fourth one, I'm very relieved to see coming forward. It's been a rumbling on for too long, and it's great to have progress. I did want to touch, however, on the two HRA disposals. My view on HRA disposals, whenever officers asked me, was no, full stop, and particularly no to rural sites. We've had our own discussions with regard to the behaviour of housing associations with their disposal programmes. And I am really sad. I think it's a serious retrograde step to see these disposals, especially, well, they're both rural. I mean, Wilton is essentially rural, semi-rural. Barford St Martin, we don't have enough council housing in villages as it stands. Whenever replacements come in, we've already had a council house build programme that's exhausted all the available HRA sites, or is in the process of building on them. We won't see more affordable housing, more council housing coming in rural locations. I think it is really sad. I know they're expensive. I know what the cost pressures are, but I also know how important it is to keep rural communities together. And I think it's a massive retrograde step that we are now seeing a change in policy that is seeing two council house sites coming forward for disposal, both of which are essentially rural. I'm trying really hard to, this is something I feel incredibly passionate about. You'll have heard me over many years making this point. I do understand the financial challenges. I don't want to minimise them, but I think you're making a huge error with those two.
Thanks, Richard. We've got James Barrow with us. I don't know, James, would you like to add any further comment? I think he's with us anyway. I can see his face on the two HRA properties. Welcome, James. Good morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning. So the properties in question are exceptional. This won't be a large feature of our activities in terms of numbers. Bear in mind that the capital receipts are ring-fenced to the HRA, and therefore those receipts are reinvested in our new stock. So this is an active asset management approach where we look to dispose of a few properties that perform really poorly and cost the business plans a significant amount, and invest that money into new stock as part of our development programme. In terms of the rurality, for example, the Lansdowne property, there are 33 more typical HRA-owned houses in Barford St Martin, being 4 1-beds, 13 2-beds, 11 3-beds, and 6 4-beds. Both of these proposals did go to a housing board recently that has representatives from our tenants as part of that board, and these proposals were supported as exceptional based on the respective business cases. I should also say that energy efficiency is a key part of our considerations now in terms of properties, and the Wilton property, you'll note, is listed, solid walls, which makes it really difficult for us to enhance that property to a reasonable energy performance level. So all in all, a range of very specific features for these two properties that bring forward an unusual opportunity for us or decision to Cabinet to dispose of properties, but it won't be to the extent that we have seen with other housing associations in recent council discussions.
Thanks, James. Gordon, please.
Morning, James. These two sites, the HRA sites, which will be disposed of to create new elsewhere, what type of rents will be on offer in those new properties?
So the properties that we're disposing will be disposed of on the open market, so they're very likely to go into private ownership. New properties that we bring into the housing stock are predominantly let at social rent, the same as the rest of our council stock. In exceptional cases where there are viability challenges or other requirements around grant funding, then affordable rent is sometimes utilised. But the whole housing sector now is moving back to a very strong preference for social rent. So it's around 60% of the market in terms of its social housing lettings.
Thank you for that clarification, James.
Thank you very much. Gavin?
Yes, I think having a blanket view on anything, frankly, cannot be the right one, Richard, and it's good of you to acknowledge the financial pressures that the council is under. You've been eloquent on those subjects, and you've lobbied government around those issues, and you know the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in, that we're going to find ourselves in. And therefore, if this were a move to have a widespread programme of disposal of social housing, it certainly would not have my support, and I doubt if it would have anybody else's support around this table. So there are exceptions that prove the rule, and these are two particular exceptions. And in the case certainly of one of them, were we to retain this property, it would be a burden on the council, and also, candidly, it would be a burden on the residents themselves, as the cost of heating that house is significant. And we can't bring it up to the level of environmental standards, and therefore to reduce costs for residents, that we would wish to do. And again, were we in a position whereby the assets being disposed of meant that those monies in the context of these two particular properties moved back into the general maw of the council, I too would have had very significant reservations about them. But that's not the situation in which we find ourselves, as you know, for the very reasons that James has already highlighted and outlined. So in principle, should we be disposing of HRA properties, and particularly in rural areas? No. Is there a very good case to be made for these two particular properties? And have they gone through a very thorough consideration? Yes, they have. Is this the right thing to do for the residents and indeed for this council? Yes, it is, Richard. You may mouth the words no, but candidly, yes, it is, or else we're simply placing a burden on ourselves and indeed on the occupants of at least one of those properties, which is unfair and inappropriate.
Got John that wants to come in, I think, next. John.
I find myself in agreement with Gavin on this, but I do have a question I'd like to ask, which is, I absolutely accept the, is exceptionality a word? Yep, the exceptionality of this case, and the logical reason to dispose of these assets. And I will take you back, Richard, to a time you quite rightly told me to stop thinking with my heart and start thinking with my head when we were talking about some children's issues. And in fairness, you may have been, I'm not going to admit you were right, because that would be too much, but you may have been right on that occasion. And I would caution you the same here. But I do want to ask, the proceeds that we're going to get from the sale of these, is that funding? Because I think for me, the really critical issue on this isn't the disposal of inefficient properties, to bring funds in that would allow us to replace them with efficient properties. That's just good business management. But the rurality issue is one that I take very seriously. Is there a way we can ring fence these funds to make sure that the proceeds we gain from these properties are used to purchase new or replace at least our stock in rural locations, rather than just another bunch of sort of whatever housing in another housing estate that goes up that is frankly a bit soulless compared with what you do get when you get council stock in villages?
Thank you for that, John. Helen, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I will. And thanks to James and Gavin for making the point that I was going to make, particularly in terms of Barford St Martin. James pointed out there were 33 other HRA housing stock which are much more compliant with energy requirements and so on. And there's no plans that I'm aware of to dispose of any of those 33. So, and I think that there would be... I agree with John. I think there's ideally we should reinvest back in and replace sort of like for like. I mean, clearly not exactly like for like, but I think that, you know, making sure that we're using the proceeds from any sales to invest in appropriate properties where they are needed and where they are, you know, if we're taking 2 houses out of 33 plus 266 houses in the areas affected by this, you know, I can't guarantee that we will replace them in Wilton and Barford St Martin, but we should be looking where the need is and investing in those places. And I think that, yes, exactly. And I think that there is work going on in terms of looking at what provision in rural locations there are. Clearly, it will depend on what land availability there is as well. But yes, absolutely. So the point has been made already. These are exceptional, unusual pieces of housing stock, which would take a lot to bring back up to modern standards, and possibly impossible in one of them. Yeah, job done.
Thank you, Helen. I think Paul is next.
Joe, having looked for a moment on Google Maps at this property, I'm familiar with the one at Kingsbury Square because I walked past it a lot during the recent elections. And it is a beautiful house, though, as has been pointed out, it is probably, from the perspective of modern build standards, you know, it doesn't come up to scratch. But it will make a wonderful house for someone. They will be very proud to be able to live in Wilton, which is a wonderful town, has so many benefits, and it's small enough for it to be perhaps done by a young couple or people starting out in life. You know, it's not a huge property, but at Kingsbury Square, I suspect it will command something of a premium. So it is right, in my opinion, that we're selling it. And the second reason I think we're right is because of this issue of responsibility to meet our climate objectives and to have houses in our housing stock which are energy efficient. You know, it's going to be hard to heat that house, but the next one that we build, funded by money from this, will meet modern environmental standards and will help us meet our climate change goals. So it has my full support.
Thank you, Paul. And just reflecting back on John's point, I think that there's nobody in this room that wouldn't agree. One, there's a housing crisis, and two, there's a rural housing crisis. And in what is perceived to be an affluent county, there's a huge amount of rural poverty that we need to address. So I'm not going to make you a guarantee sitting here making up policy, but certainly I would want to see officers coming back to us to confirm, as far as they possibly can, that funding from the sale of the 2 properties will deliver homes in rural areas as part of our plan. I know if Adrian were here, he'd want to just reflect on the fact that we are going to come forward with a significantly increased council house programme plan, and one would expect that would include a significant proportion in rural communities. So I think that you have that commitment that we'll be doing that, John. Richard, do come back though, please.
Yes, thank you. I mean, a couple of points. Clearly, you're going to reach the decision you're about to reach. The idea that by selling this, you're making our housing, or selling us one of these properties, you're making housing in Wiltshire more carbon efficient is nonsense. The house will still be sitting there and will still be as carbon inefficient as it is right now. It will still need that updating. That is an argument that I'd be very careful to use. It's one that the housing associations use, and it does them no justice when they do. I really do understand the point about the amount of money that can be needed, but government's Warm Homes funding programme, it now involves significant £1 billion multi-year commitments. There are funding streams that ought to be able to be accessed and tapped into there to help address particularly properties like these. And I come back, I mean, you're looking at selling a third of the social housing in Barford St Martin. It won't come back. It won't, because it's so hard. We've already used all the spare sites we can find in these small villages. And that social cohesion. Yes, this could be a lovely house for a couple. It could be a lovely house right now for a couple who are in desperate need and on a housing waiting list, therefore meet the absolute base criteria that we as a country have set for people who need housing. So I understand the point about exceptional circumstance. I've had the discussion on many occasions with James and always come to the same conclusion from my perspective that we shouldn't do it, and we really shouldn't do it in rural areas. Okay, I'm not going to change anything here. I am really sad on a personal level, not a political one, and I doubtless there'll be political points made about this later, but here, on a personal level, I'm really sad to see us as a council doing that and seeing council housing being sold within 2 months of me no longer being leader. I find that, yeah, it's quite depressing.
A final word, thank you, by the way, a final word from Helen.
Yeah, just another quick technical point. It's 1 out of 33 houses in Barford St Martin, and that is not a third of the housing stock. You said a third. Yeah.
My apologies, 3%. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, okay.
As long as we've got the data right, because data absolutely very important. I'm going to just ask if there's anybody else that would like to contribute to our discussion. Nobody's jumping up. Okay, thank you for that. Would you like to read the recommendations, Helen, please?
To the right place. Get to the right document, actually would help. Okay, so Cabinet is requested to note the progress for capital receipts in the current year, the 41k, approve the sale of the freehold interest of the 4 assets in Appendix 2 to generate capital receipts in support of the Council's capital programme, if deemed in the best overall interest of the Council, and to authorise the Director of Assets to dispose of the freehold interest in the assets, or, in their absence, the Corporate Director of Resources.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Gordon. Those in favour? My hand up at this point. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that conversation and discussion. I'm going to move us on to item 9, which is the award of the new traffic signal maintenance contract. And I'm going to hand over to Martin, who I think will then probably take us into part 2. Martin.
Yeah, thank you. It's the item you've all been waiting for, I'm sure. But if we didn't have a contract like this, I think the roads in the county would probably seize up within a matter of hours. So it is actually quite important. So yeah, we've had a 5-year contract with a 1-year extension in place with a company called Talent Design and provide traffic signals maintenance. The current contract is in its 6th year and will end on the 30th of September. So obviously a procurement exercise has been underway, inviting tenders since February in accordance with the council procurement. And this will obviously replace the current contract when it ends. It's going to be very similar to the existing one, providing traffic signals maintenance, improvement works and other associated civil works. It's going to make sure we have a continuity of service and allow the council to deliver on its statutory duties, etc. So it's proposed a new contract will come into operation on the 1st of October. The rest of the report gives details on the procurement process, the criteria used to score the tender responses, the weighting given to price and quality criteria, and a summary of the main provisions in the new contract. But obviously, due to the commercial sensitivities of the report, we need to continue in part 2 of the meeting. So we're in part 2.
Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to move into part 2. Oh, well, before you do that, are there any urgent items? There are no urgent items. What a relief. But thank you for that, Stuart. So we're going to move to item 11, exclusion of the press and public. Councillors can stay, Julia, if you really want to.
That's very gracious of you, but I'm starving.
We're all starving, but we've still got to sit here. So.
It's very informative.
Thank you very much for coming. There we are. I'm just double checking. Are you leaving as well? Oh, okay, fair. Well, thank you very much and good luck with everything you're doing. I always have to ask the question, do I need to read the whole thing out, or are we happy with just the blue bit? Okay, so I'm going to move the following words to agree that in accordance with section 100A in parentheses 4 of the Local Government Acts 1972 to exclude the public from the meeting for the business specified in item numbers 12 and 13, because it's likely that if members of the public were present, there will be a disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Act, and the public interest in withholding the information outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information to the public. No wonder lawyers make so much money. It's incredible, isn't it? So I'm proposing that. Can I have a seconder? Everybody in favour? Otherwise, we're rather stuck. Thank you very much. And I'm now going to return to Martin with the guts of the report. Martin.
Okay.
And we